Hello everyone, I'm Hayden from CGYplanespotter, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're going to be doing an extreme light recovery on this Virgin Atlantic A330-900 Neo on final for runway 27 left at London Heathrow Airport. So, this is the extreme light recovery rather than the simple light recovery. This one will require masking and plenty of dehaze in these clouds. So, start off by opening the file. Now, you can see here, if you shoot JPEG, you want this format here to be camera raw, not Photoshop. But if you shoot RAW, this should just be Photoshop in it, and you'll get put under the camera raw filter just fine. So we're going to start off by opening up the file. And you can see here how the sharpness on the aircraft is nice, so we're not going to really need Topaz Sharpen AI. Sharpen AI is optional, you don't need it, but I would recommend it if your shot isn't that sharp. So we're going to start off by bringing up the shadows here. And you can see here how the reflection on the belly looks a bit disgusting from the grass below the aircraft. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the color mixer here, go to the saturation section, click this, and click on the colors of the belly, and just drag it to the left. Now you can see the aircraft looks a lot cleaner than it used to, and we can bring the shadows back down to about 60, I would say. Then we're going to go with the denoise. So I like to use the Photoshop built-in denoise. You can use Topaz denoise if you want, but then it'll be a much bigger pain to work on the rest of the editing. I would just recommend Topaz denoise. Photoshop denoise. It's much better than Topaz, in my personal opinion. Much more effective at removing noise, and there's not a significant loss in sharpness. So when I do my denoise, I like to have it at around 75 or 80. I'm going to put it at 75 in this case. And you can see here, we'll just wait for the preview to show. All the noise is gone, but the detail stays. So I'll just fast forward till when this denoise is finished. Okay, so now that the denoise is finished, what we're going to do is we're going to just view the detail on the aircraft, and you can see that there's a tiny loss in sharpness. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over to the detail section and increase the sharpening just a little bit. So I wouldn't recommend going any more than 70. And then what we're going to do is we're going to hit either Option on a Mac or Alt on a Windows and just increase the masking up to a point where you can see the outlines are just perfect. And that way the sharpness is perfect, but it's also not massively increasing the noise. So, now that we've done this, we're going to take care of the cropping. So, I like to have this in either 1:1 or 4:5 aspect ratio, but the 4:5 is vertical. 4:5 aspect ratio actually reduces compression on Instagram, but 1:1 is a little bit better for, you know, if you want to get these houses and stuff out of the photo. So I like to kind of crop it a bit tightly around the tail, or if you want, you can have a good margin here and you have the flaps as kind of the end of your crop. So I like to use the little rotation thing here to find the center of the aircraft. Now to center it properly. Center should be right here on the grid. Just move it down a little bit, and then once I crop it on the preview, we'll just see how that looks. So now that we've done this, what we're going to do is we're going to go over to the basic bit again. We're going to bump up the dehaze just a small amount. Bump up the shadows too to compensate. Now that we've done this, we're going to go to linear grading here, and we'll extend it up a little bit, not too much. Bring the exposure down, contrast up, go down here, clarity up, and the dehaze up by a small amount, not too much. You can see that the aircraft still looks half decent. Bump up the shadows a tiny bit more. Then we're going to add another linear gradient, going down this time. Make sure that not too much of the aircraft is in the mask. Exposure down, contrast up, whites up, blacks down, clarity up, and dehaze up a little bit. Now you can see here, when you bring out the dehaze, your dust spots will show a little bit. So, while we're still in the original camera raw, we may as well take care of the dust spots now. Just go to the healing tool and select the heal. Just click on the dust spot, have an appropriate size. And now the dust spot is gone. Now, what I'm going to do really quickly is I'm just going to max the dehaze. This will help you with finding dust spots. Obviously, revert this. That's a bit too much. Revert this when you're done, because then obviously the photo will just look absolutely terrible if you don't. And we will clone out these power lines in Photoshop Beta later on with generative fill, but for now, we'll just work on the normal editing process. So, going to get rid of the dust spots just now. And if you don't have dust spots, you can just skip this process. It's completely optional. And if you want your photos to look a bit worse, you can keep the dust spots in, but I personally wouldn't recommend that myself. So, you can see now that the sky is the clouds are a little bit more brought out, and the aircraft still looks a bit fine, but the aircraft looks a bit underexposed. So, now, this is where the more challenging part comes in. Before we do this, we're just going to bump up the texture a little bit to increase the sharpness. I would not go any higher than 30 on the texture. You can see the aircraft looks perfectly sharp now, very crisp. And we're going to bump up the vibrance too. We're going to go to the tone curve. Lights up a little bit. Darks up as well. And the shadows down. You can see here that this adds a little bit of contrast and a little bit of fade as well. So, we're now going to press return on a Mac or enter on a Windows, and this will open up the file in Photoshop. Now that we've opened up the file in Photoshop, what we're going to do is we're going to unlock this background layer, we're going to duplicate it, and we're going to name it whatever you want. I'm just going to name it Plain Brighton, because this is where the masking will come in. So, we're going to go to the pen tool here, and make sure it's selected on path. What we're going to do is, it's going to click starting at the nose gear, and to curve the pen tool, you just hold down and drag it, as you can see here. So this will help you follow the shape of the aircraft, and I would recommend doing this quite often in terms of points. So I'm just going to fast forward this. This is basically simple masking. It's not really that difficult, but it is the longest process by far during editing like this, especially light recoveries, because you kind of have to mask, especially in an extreme light recovery. So I'll just fast forward until I'm finished this. And by the way, you do not need to mask the landing gear because that will be taken care of later. You also do not need to mask these antennas. Real quick, it seems as though I had forgotten to do lens corrections, and I don't really want to go back and do them, but to just be simple, to go into the camera raw filter, what you want to do is you want to go to the optics section down here, and you'll have an option to remove chromatic aberration and enable lens corrections. If you don't have a lens profile, this is probably because you shoot JPEG, which I do not recommend doing. Having a lens profile will allow it to correct the vignetting and the distortion, and removing chromatic aberration will remove these very annoying colors here. So, yeah, I would just recommend doing lens corrections, because it seems as though I forgot, which was not a good thing. Now when it comes to the landing gear, especially when the landing gear is kind of on the aircraft, as you can see here, what I would recommend doing is, rather than just masking the landing gear because it will look a bit terrible in the end, just go around it. That's the best option. So, see here, because this will help maintain a certain level of realism in a way, because then the aircraft tires won't look super bright and the blacks will still be maintained. And with an antenna that just barely sticks out like this, you may as well just mask around it. So in this case, I would not recommend masking the landing gear, and in particular as well the other side of the aircraft, because if you don't want this to have kind of a aircraft is completely lit up look, and you know, in most cases you would have, in proper lighting, only one side of the aircraft would be properly lit up. So I'm just not going to mask this part. You can if you want, but that will add a lot of extra time to your editing process, and it's just not recommended. So when we get to the nose gear, all I would recommend that you actually mask is just the nose gear doors. So you can see here, let's go around the doors, and then you can see here this little black bit. I'm going to mask that, go around this, and just mask that. Okay, so now that we've finished the masking, what we're going to do is we're going to click this little kind of circle inside of a rectangle twice. Now you can see the mask is visible here. What we're going to do is we're going to go to this bit here and click screen. Now you can see the aircraft is much brighter than it was previously and arguably looks much better. So what we're going to do now is we're going to duplicate this layer and we're going to name it Sky Contrast. Now the aircraft may look brighter and you may think that's better, but not for now. What we're going to do is we're going to turn off the screen and we're going to mask a little square right around it. Now that we've done this, we're going to go into the camera raw filter, and this is where the magic will happen. This is where we're going to do all the sky masking and where the clouds will look a lot more contrasty than they did previously. So we're going to start by bumping up the contrast here. To, I don't know, 30 should do the trick. Exposure up a little bit. Whites up, blacks down, clarity up slightly, dehaze up, and we're going to use linear gradients here to bring out the clouds. Going to angle it kind of parallel to the plane, bring the exposure down, contrast up, do another one on the bottom here. Exposure down, contrast up, clarity up, dehaze up a little bit. Now we're going to bring the exposure up, contrast up a tiny bit, texture up, vibrance down, and we're going to click OK. Now you can see here, the sky is a lot more contrasty than it used to be. We're going to go over to the plane brighten layer, and in order to work this out here, we're going to bring up the exposure on the aircraft slightly, shadows up, and we're going to go into the layer again. You can see here how the engines look a bit brighter than they should, so we're going to bring the blacks down just ever so slightly. And now, to help bring out the reflections, we're going to increase the clarity by just a small amount, no more than 25. So, now that we've done this, what we're going to do is we're going to go back over to the sky contrast layer, and you can see here how this cloud looks a little bit too dark, in a sense. So, I'm going to bring out a radial gradient here, make it a little bit big. Exposure goes back up a small amount. I'm going to do another radial gradient on this corner of the sky. Exposure down, contrast up. Make sure that the feather isn't too much, so 75 roughly should do. And I'm going to go over here, clarity up, dehaze up. We're going to click OK. So now you can see the skies look a lot more contrasty than they used to. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go over to the layer section, and we're going to click Flatten Image. So my camera sensor, for whatever this reason, has this weird line whenever I take photos, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to simply clone it out or heal it. Okay, now that that's gone, we can take care of the rest of the editing process. So we're going to go back to the camera raw filter, and you can see here how the engine over here looks a bit too dark. And if we go over to the section here, there's a lot of shadow clipping. So we're going to go with a radial gradient here, and right on the engine, we're going to tilt it a little bit so that it aligns with the engine. Exposure up. Highlights down, shadows up, clarity up, just a small amount. And there's still a lot of shadow clipping on the engine, which is fine, because again, there should be shadow clipping on the landing gear too. And I would say there's actually a bit too much feather on this, so I'm going to decrease that. Contrast goes up. Still looks a bit unrealistic, so I'm going to bring the exposure down ever so slightly. Okay, now that we've done this, what we're going to do is we're going to go over to the white balance section, and we're going to make the temperature just a little bit colder. Not too much. This will give the shot kind of that cold mood that you want, and makes this guys look a bit meaner in a way. We're going to go back to the camera raw filter, contrast up, and you can see here how the skies look a bit, you know, purple. That isn't exactly what we want, so we're going to desaturate the purples with the color mixing. Just want to make sure that this doesn't screw up the colors on the aircraft. So, what we're going to do here now, another radial gradient, just like this. Exposure down, another radial gradient in this corner. Exposure up, contrast up. Clarity up, dehaze up. And in this corner, what I want to do is I want to make it a little bit colder. Up the contrast, bring the exposure actually back up slightly. Contrast up a bit more. I would say the white balance here is a bit too cold, so I'm just going to balance that. Now that we've done this, we're going to click OK. You can see that we've made the skies look a bit more contrasty. And this is basically it. So you can continue your editing process if you want. Now, please note that there are masking lines here, which you can get rid of, but I'm not sure how. So you can actually see here how we have included this bit in the masking. That's not entirely what I wanted. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go here to the... it's originally the dodge tool, this magnifying glass looking thing. You want to right click it and click burn tool. And make sure it's on highlights. Exposure should be, I don't know, 15 or 20. And just, you know, go over it lightly. Not too much. But to a point where it won't look overexposed and will still look a bit realistic. So pass by this like that. You can see it looks a bit less overexposed now. Same bit here with this section in between the flaps and the tail. And this bit here that I missed as well. Okay. So, now that we've done this, this is a completely optional step, and you don't have to do this, but in this case, if the aircraft is an A350 or an A330neo, this is actually a very satisfying part of editing the photo, and that is darkening the raccoon shades. So, we're going to go to the brush here, and just mask kind of right around here. We're going to make the cockpit windows a bit, we're going to bring out the cockpit windows here before we darken the raccoon shades. So, just gonna mask around the cockpit windows. You can do this on a 787 as well, depending on the angle, because the cockpit windows look a bit purple. So now that we've masked this, we're going to go to the exposure, bring it up a slight bit, contrast up, kind of actually maxed, I would say. Clarity up, not too much. You can see here that now that we've done this, just brought out that. So we're going to mask this again. I'm going to go to 800% zoom so that it's a bit easier. I'm going to mask this again with the brush. Make sure that it has a slight feather, like 15, depending on your camera's megapixels. Like in my case, mine is 24, but this is cropped down to about, I don't know, maybe 18, I forgot to check. Probably even 10, but it largely just depends on the amount of detail that your camera captures. So, I'm just gonna go around like this. Be sure to be nice and gentle when you're using the brush, because if you're aggressive with the brush, then it's an absolute nightmare to clean up. Okay, now that we've done this, we're going to go to the exposure, bring this down, way down, and you can see now, it looks way better than it used to. So, I'm going to click OK. Now, we are basically finished. So, this next step is optional again if you want. I like to add watermarks to my photos. It's not really much of a watermark as it is just my signature. So, I have a specific font downloaded for it. Don't know how the hell to pronounce it, but I'll just type in my name here. And then I like to put it on the plane so that it's not really removable, even with Photoshop Beta's generative fill feature. And I actually forgot to do this earlier. They don't even really need generative fill to do this. Just go to the healing tool and just clone out these power lines. Boom, gone. So I'll just put the layer back here. I'll put the watermark kind of right smack in the middle. I'll go for a white watermark. Bring the opacity down to about 50. Going to rasterize the layer so that it's easier to navigate in terms of the center of the photo. And boom, we are done with the light recovery. So this is the more difficult light recovery that there is. I will be releasing a tutorial later on in terms of the more simple light recovery process that involves no masking at all, and instead of just using the screen function to brighten the plane, you would just bring up the whites a small amount and the exposure to compensate. So thank you all for watching this tutorial. This was requested by a lot of you guys, so I really hope that it was useful to all of you, and thank you for watching. CGYplanespotter, out.